Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been with SEAL Team 7 for exactly 9 months when everything went sideways. 9 months of proving herself every single day, of being watched more closely than any male operator, of having her every decision questioned and analyzed. At 26 years old, she was one of only 3 women who had ever made it through the brutal SEAL qualification training, and the only one currently assigned to an operational team. That fact alone made her a target for skepticism, both from some of her teammates and from herself during the quiet moments when doubt crept in. The operation was supposed to be simple: a routine intelligence-gathering mission in a contested region near the Syrian border. Sarah's team of 8 operators would insert via helicopter, establish an observation post overlooking a compound suspected of housing a high-value target, collect intelligence for 72 hours, and extract. No direct action. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Just eyes on target and good intelligence for the next phase of operations. Sarah checked her gear for the 3rd time as the helicopter thundered through the night sky. Her M4 rifle, night vision equipment, communications gear, medical supplies, and 3 days' worth of food and water. Everything was exactly where it should be. She'd learned early in her SEAL training that equipment checks weren't about finding problems. They were about managing anxiety, about giving your hands something to do while your mind prepared for what was coming. Sitting across from her in the helicopter was Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, the team's senior enlisted operator, and a man who had made his feelings about female SEALs very clear. He'd never said anything overtly hostile, but Sarah could feel the doubt radiating from him. He watched her constantly during training exercises, waiting for her to fail, to prove his belief that women didn't belong in special operations. The other 6 operators on the team fell somewhere on a spectrum between Webb's skepticism and genuine acceptance. Sarah had stopped trying to win them all over. Her plan was simpler: perform. So well that doubt became impossible. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through Sarah's headset. 2 minutes to insertion point. Sarah's heart rate increased, but her breathing stayed controlled. Fear was natural. Letting it control you was not. She ran through the mission profile one more time in her head. The team would fast trope down to a landing zone 3 kilometers from the target compound. They would move on foot through rough terrain to the observation post location. Lieutenant Commander James Garrett, the team leader, would position the operators and establish the watch rotation. Sarah's role was overwatch security and communications. She would maintain contact with base while the primary observers gathered. Intelligence on the compound. The helicopter flared and came to a hover. The crew chief slid the door open and night air rushed into the cabin. Sarah could see the ground below through her night vision goggles, a greenish landscape of rocks and sparse vegetation. The crew chief threw out the fast rope, and it tumbled down into the darkness.
Go.
Lieutenant Commander Garrett shouted. The operators moved quickly, sliding down the rope one after another. Sarah went forth, her gloved hands gripping the thick rope as she dropped rapidly toward the ground. She landed smoothly, immediately taking a knee and scanning her sector with her rifle. The other operators formed a defensive perimeter around the landing zone as the helicopter pulled away, its rotor wash kicking up dust and debris. Then there was silence. The kind of complete silence that only exists in remote, unpopulated places far from civilization. Sarah's ears rang slightly from the helicopter noise, but as that faded, she could hear the small sounds of the desert at night. Wind moving through rocks, the quiet breathing of her teammates through their communication system, the soft rustle of gear as they prepared to move. Lieutenant Commander Garrett used hand signals to organize the team into a patrol formation. They would move into column formation through the darkness, using night vision to navigate the treacherous terrain. Sarah fell into her assigned position in the formation, keeping proper spacing from the operator in front of her, maintaining awareness of her assigned security sector. The movement to the observation post took 2 hours. The terrain was brutal, all loose rocks and steep inclines that threatened to turn an ankle with every step. Sarah's pack weighed 60 pounds, and she could feel the strain in her legs and back. But she kept pace with the team, never falling behind, never asking for a break. Chief Webb was directly behind her in the formation. She knew he was watching, waiting for any sign of weakness. They reached the observation post location just before midnight. It was a rocky hillside with a clear view down into a valley where the target compound sat about 800 meters away. Lieutenant Commander Garrett positioned the operators in a defensive perimeter and designated two-man teams for the observation rotation. Sarah was paired with Petty Officer First Class David Martinez for the first watch. Martinez was one of the operators who had accepted Sarah without reservation. Treating her like any other member of the team, Sarah and Martinez settled into their position, using their night vision and spotting scopes to observe the compound below. It was a typical Middle Eastern structure, rectangular buildings arranged around a central courtyard, high walls providing security. Through the thermal imaging scope, Sarah could see heat signatures indicating at least a dozen people moving around inside the compound. "Control, this is Shadow 7, Sarah whispered into her radio. "Establishing communication with the operations center back at base. We are in position at the observation post. Beginning surveillance of target compound." The reply came back clear and professional. "Shadow 7, control copies. You are cleared to observe and report. Maintain radio silence unless you have priority traffic or emergency." The hours of the first watch passed slowly. Sarah recorded details about the compound, noting the number of people visible, their patterns of movement, the locations of what appeared to be security positions. Martinez did the same, and they compared observations to ensure accuracy. This was the tedious but critical work of intelligence gathering. Every detail could matter when analysts were trying to determine if this compound truly housed the high-value target they were seeking. At 0300 hours, Sarah and Martinez were relieved by the next watch team. Sarah moved back from the observation position and found a place to rest among the rocks. She couldn't sleep, not yet. Her body was too wired, her mind too active. She ate an energy bar and drank some water. Keeping her movements small and controlled to avoid making noise, Chief Webb settled into a position near Sarah, close enough that she could hear his quiet breathing. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Webb's voice came through her earpiece, pitched low so only she could hear. "You kept up pretty well on the movement," he said. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but coming from Webb, it was something. "Thank you, Chief," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. Another long silence. Then Webb spoke again. "Don't take this personal, but I still think this is a mistake. Women in the teams. It's not about capability. It's about unit cohesion. It's about distractions." Sarah had heard variations of this argument before. She could have gotten angry. She could have argued. Instead, she chose her words carefully. "Chief, I respect your opinion, but I'm here now. I made it through the same training you did. I meet the same standards. The only way I know to address your concerns is to do my job well. So that's what I'm going to do." Webb didn't respond, but Sarah thought she detected something in his silence. Not acceptance exactly, but maybe a grudging acknowledgement. It was the best she could hope for. The rest of the night passed without incident. When dawn approached, the team concealed themselves more thoroughly, using camouflage nets and natural terrain features to ensure they couldn't be spotted from the valley below. During daylight hours, movement would be minimal. They would observe in shifts, maintain radio silence except for scheduled check-ins, and wait for night to fall again. Sarah's next watch rotation came at noon. When the desert sun turned the hillside into an oven, she and Martinez returned to their observation position, now sweltering under the camouflage net. Through the spotting scope, Sarah watched as vehicles arrived at the compound. 3 SUVs with tinted windows, moving with the kind of security consciousness that suggested important passengers. "We've got movement," Martinez whispered. 3 vehicles entering the compound. Sarah adjusted her scope, watching as armed men emerged from the vehicles first, scanning the surrounding area before allowing the passengers to exit. When they finally did, Sarah's breath caught. One of the passengers matched the description of their high-value target. She couldn't be completely certain from this distance, but the resemblance was striking. "Control, Shadow 7, Sarah transmitted, breaking radio silence. We have possible visual confirmation of primary target. 3 vehicles entered compound at 12:15 local time. Passenger from vehicle to matches target description. The response from base was immediate and excited. Shadow 7, control copies. Maintain observation. Stand by for further guidance. Lieutenant Commander Garrett made a decision. Shadow 7 elements. Prepare to interdict vehicle. We cannot let the target escape. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. They were going from observation to direct combat in seconds. 8 operators against an unknown number of enemy fighters. No backup. No quick reaction force available. Just them and whatever was about to come up that road. She checked her rifle, ensuring a round was chambered. Her hands were steady, despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This was what all the training had been for. This was the moment that would define whether she truly belonged here. The sound of the truck's engine grew louder as it approached their position. Sarah could see dust rising in the distance. Chief Webb moved into position beside her, his rifle trained on the road. For just a second, their eyes met. In that moment, all the doubt and skepticism fell away. They were operators, and they had a job to do. The truck rounded the bend in the road, and Sarah saw there were at least 6 armed men in the vehicle. The odds had just gotten worse. Lieutenant Commander Garrett's voice came through her earpiece, calm and controlled despite the chaos about to unfold. Weapons free on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The world exploded into violence in the span of 3 heartbeats. Sarah's rifle cracked as she fired controlled pairs into the truck's engine block, trying to disable the vehicle. Around her, the other 7 operators opened fire simultaneously, their shots tearing through metal and glass. The truck swerved violently as the driver was hit, careening off the road and slamming into a boulder 20. Meters from the team's position, Sarah's training took over completely. Her conscious mind stepped back and let muscle memory guide her movements. Acquire target, breathe, squeeze trigger, shift to next target. The mechanical process kept the terror at bay, kept her focused on staying alive and completing the mission. 3 enemy fighters tumbled out of the truck bed, returning fire wildly. Their shots cracked through the air around Sarah's position, striking rocks and kicking up dust. She heard Martinez grunt beside her and risked a glance. He'd been hit in the shoulder, blood already soaking through his uniform, but he was still firing. Martinez is hit, Sarah shouted into her radio while continuing to engage targets. She dropped 1 enemy fighter with 2 shots center mass. Watching him crumple behind the truck, the firefight lasted less than 60 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. When the shooting finally stopped, 6 enemy fighters lay dead around the disabled truck. The 8th team member, Petty Officer, 2nd Class James Rodriguez, moved forward carefully to clear the vehicle and check for the high-value target. Sarah's hands shook slightly as she performed a tactical reload, replacing her partially empty magazine with a fresh one. The adrenaline was still screaming through her system, making everything feel sharp and unreal at the same time. She'd been in firefights during training exercises, but this was different. Those had been real bullets, real men trying to kill her, real blood soaking into the desert sand. Rodriguez reached the truck and looked inside the cab, then turned back to the team. His next words sent ice through Sarah's veins. Target is not in the vehicle. Repeat, target is not here. Lieutenant Commander Garrett cursed quietly. They'd just compromised their position, revealed themselves to the enemy. And the target wasn't even in the truck they'd intercepted. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. The compound below had definitely heard the gunfire. They would know American forces were in the area. The entire mission was falling apart. Shadow 7, control. Sit rep. The operations center's voice crackled through the radio, demanding an update. Garrett responded quickly. Control, we engaged a vehicle leaving the target compound. 6 enemy Kia, 1 friendly wounded. Target was not in the vehicle. Our position is compromised. Request immediate extract. There was a pause. Then the worst possible response came through. Shadow 7, negative, on extract. No available assets for a minimum 45 minutes. Enemy reinforcements are likely moving to your position from the compound. You need to relocate immediately." Sarah's stomach dropped. 45 minutes might as well have been 45 hours. The compound was less than a kilometer away. If they sent fighters to investigate the gunfire, they could reach the team's position in minutes. And those fighters would be coming in greater numbers, probably with heavier weapons, definitely with the home field advantage. "Get Martinez stabilized," Garrett ordered. "We're moving to alternate position Bravo." 2 minutes, people. "Let's move." Starra slung her rifle and moved to help Martinez. The wound in his shoulder was bleeding badly, but didn't appear to have hit an artery. She packed it with gauze from her medical kit, while Petty Officer First Class Chen, the team's medic, administered morphine and prepared a pressure bandage. "I can still fight," Martinez said through gritted teeth, his face pale but determined. "Damn right you can," Sarah replied, helping him to his feet. She knew they needed every rifle they could get. There was no carrying wounded to safety here. Everyone had to move and fight or they would all die. The team grabbed their gear and began moving away from the ambush site, heading higher into the rocky hills. Alternate position Bravo was a more defensible location about 2 kilometers away. A cluster of large boulders that would provide better cover and concealment, but getting there meant moving fast over treacherous terrain. While expecting enemy contact at any moment, Sarah helped support Martinez as they moved, taking some of his weight while he fought to keep pace. Chief Webb had taken point, using his experience to pick the fastest route through the rocks. Sarah could hear his breathing through the radio, quick but controlled. Behind them, Rodriguez and another operator whose call sign was Boxer provided rear security, were watching for pursuit. They'd covered maybe half a kilometer when Boxer's voice cut through the radio. "Contact rear." Multiple fighters moving up from the compound. The team didn't stop moving, but Sarah turned enough to see figures emerging from the valley below. At least a dozen armed men moving with military precision in a tactical formation. These weren't random insurgents. These were trained fighters who knew what they were doing. Garrett made a quick decision. "Chen Webb, establish a blocking position at that ridge line. Slow them down, but don't get decisively engaged. Rest of the team keeps moving to Bravo. We'll cover your withdrawal once we're in position." Chen and Webb peeled off immediately, finding positions among the rocks where they could fire down on the pursuing enemy. Sarah wanted to stay and fight with them, every instinct screaming that you didn't leave teammates behind. But she also knew that getting Martinez to the defensive position was critical, and orders were orders. The first shots rang out behind them as Chen and Webb engaged the pursuers. Sarah counted the gunfire, trying to judge how many enemy fighters were shooting back. Too many. Way too many. This wasn't a small patrol sent to investigate gunfire. This was a major force, probably the compound's entire security element. Hunting them down, the team reached alternate position, Bravo, just as Sarah heard Webb's voice on the radio. Falling back now? They're pushing hard. Sarah helped Martinez into a covered position behind a large boulder, then moved to establish her own firing position. She had good fields of fire covering the approach Chen and Webb would use. And beyond that, the route the enemy would have to take. Her heart pounded. But her hands were steady as she settled her rifle into her shoulder and scanned through her optic. Webb and Chen appeared, moving fast but controlled, bounding back toward the team's position. Behind them, Sarah could see the pursuing enemy force spread out across the hillside. At least 20 fighters now, maybe more. They were executing a textbook assault, using cover and fire and maneuver to close the distance. "Light them up." Garrett ordered. Sarah and the other operators opened fire, their bullets forcing the enemy to take cover and disrupting their advance. Webb and Chen used the covering fire to sprint the final distance to the team's position, diving behind rocks as enemy rounds cracked through the air around them. Now the real fight began. The enemy had the team pinned down in the boulder field, and they had superior numbers. The Americans had better training and better equipment. But they were low on ammunition and had no support available for almost 40 minutes. Sarah did the math in her head and didn't like the answer. They had maybe 200 rounds per person. Against 20-plus enemy fighters who could be resupplied from the compound, those rounds wouldn't last long. "Control, Shadow 7, Garrett transmitted. We are in heavy contact. Estimate 20 to 30 enemy fighters. We are pinned at alternate position Bravo. We need that extract ASAP, or we're not making it out of here. The response was sympathetic but unhelpful. Shadow 7. Understand your situation. Doing everything we can to expedite support. Hold your position. Help is coming. Hold the position. Sarah would have laughed if the situation wasn't so desperate. They didn't have a choice but to hold. Retreating now would mean exposing themselves to enemy fire with no cover. They had to defend this position until extraction arrived, or until they ran out of ammunition. Whichever came first, the enemy probed the team's defenses, trying to find weak points. They would fire from one position, then try to advance from another angle while the Americans were suppressed. It was good tactics. And it was slowly working. The enemy was getting closer, tightening the noose. Sarah fired carefully, making every round count. She dropped one fighter who tried to rush their position, then shifted to engage another who was providing covering fire. Beside her, Martinez was still in the fight despite his wound, his shots steady and accurate. On her other side, Chief Webb fired with the calm precision of a man who had been in more firefights than he could count. 30 minutes into the fight, Sarah's worst fear was confirmed. Running low on ammunition, she reported. She had maybe 40 rounds left. Around her, the other operators were reporting similar numbers. Garrett's response was grim. Conserve ammunition. Aimed fire only. We have to make it last until extract arrives. The enemy seemed to sense the Americans were weakening. They intensified their assault, firing more frequently, trying to advance from multiple directions simultaneously. Sarah was so focused on her sector that she almost missed the critical development. Rodriguez, watching a different approach, shouted a warning. Technical inbound. They've got a truck with a heavy machine gun. Sarah's blood turned cold. A pickup truck with a mounted machine gun, could tear through their defensive position in seconds. The .50 caliber. Rounds from that weapon would punch through the rocks they were hiding behind like they were paper. If that technical got into firing position, the team was finished. The truck appeared on the road below, bouncing over the rough terrain as it raced toward a position where it would have clear fields of fire on the American position. The enemy fighters were laying down suppressive fire, trying to keep the SEALs from engaging the technical. Take out that technical, Garrett screamed. Everyone focus fire on the technical. Sarah swung her rifle toward the moving vehicle, tracking it through her optic. The range was long, maybe 400 meters, and the truck was moving fast. She'd have to lead the target account for bullet drop, and time her shot perfectly. She took a breath, let it out halfway, and started squeezing the trigger in a steady rhythm. Her round struck the truck's hood and windshield, but it kept coming. Around her, the other operators were firing at the technical as well, their bullets sparking off the metal frame. But the gunner in the truck bed was starting to swing the heavy machine gun toward their position. Sarah saw it happening in slow motion. The massive barrel of the .50 caliber gun turning toward them. The gunner settling behind the weapon, his hands reaching for the firing mechanism. In seconds, that gun would open fire, and everything would be over. Then, Martinez, wounded and fading from blood loss, did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. He stood up from behind his cover, exposing himself completely, and fired a full magazine at the technical on full automatic. His round stitched across the truck's cab, shattering what remained of the windshield and hitting the driver. The technical swerved wildly, the driver dead or dying at the wheel. It veered off the road and slammed into a rock outcropping, the impact throwing the gunner from the truck bed. The heavy machine gun pointed uselessly at the sky. But Martinez paid for his heroism. Enemy fire caught him in the chest before he could get back behind cover. He fell backward, and Sarah was moving before she even realized it, lunging from her position to drag Martinez behind a boulder. Bullets cracked through the air where she'd just been standing. Chen was already there, ripping open Martinez's vest to assess the wound. Sarah saw the medic's face and knew immediately it was bad. The round had punched through Martinez's chest, likely hitting a lung or his heart. Chen worked frantically, but Sarah could see blood bubbling from Martinez's mouth. Martinez grabbed Sarah's hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite his injuries. He looked at her, trying to speak, but only blood came out. His eyes, though, said everything. Keep fighting. Don't let this be for nothing. Win. Then his grip went slack, and his eyes stared at nothing. Chen checked for a pulse, then slowly shook his head. David Martinez, who had accepted Sarah without judgment, who had treated her like any other operator, was dead. Rage flooded through Sarah, hot and overwhelming. She wanted to scream, to cry, to unload every remaining round she had at the enemy who had killed her teammate. But she channeled that rage into cold focus. Martinez had died to stop that technical. She would honor his sacrifice by staying alive and completing the mission. The fight continued. Sarah lost track of time. She fired until her rifle ran dry, then switched to her pistol. Around her, the other operators were doing the same. They were down to their last ammunition, and the enemy was still coming. Then, like a gift from heaven, Sarah heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the roar of jet engines overhead. Shadow 7, this is Reaper 2-1. A new voice crackled through the radio. We have you in sight and are cleared hot. Mark your position and keep your heads down. Guard through an infrared strobe that would be visible to the pilots but not to the enemy fighters. Reaper 2-1, Shadow 7, danger close strike authorized. Enemy fighters are within 100 meters of our position. Reaper copies. Commencing attack run. Take cover. The F-18 screamed overhead, and seconds later, the hillside erupted in fire and thunder. The precision-guided bombs landed among the enemy positions with devastating accuracy. The shockwave from the explosions washed over the SEAL team's position, and Sarah pressed herself against the rock as debris rained down around them. When she looked up, the enemy force had been shattered. Bodies and burning wreckage littered the hillside. The few surviving fighters were retreating in disorder, all organization gone, just men running for their lives. Reaper 2-1, good hits. Garrett transmitted. Enemy forces broken and retreating. The pilot's response was professional but satisfied. Shadow 7, your extract birds are inbound. ETA 5 minutes. Reaper flight will provide top cover until you're airborne. 5 minutes. They'd made it. Sarah slumped against the boulder, exhaustion and grief crashing over her in waves. They'd survived, but Martinez was dead, and that fact sat in her chest like a stone. She looked over at Martinez's body, covered now with someone's jacket, and felt tears burning in her eyes. Chief Webb moved to sit beside her, his face streaked with dirt and gunpowder residue. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Webb did something Sarah never expected. He put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and respect. You fought well, Webb said quietly. Martinez would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. You proved yourself today, Chen? Truly proved yourself, Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. The extraction helicopters were approaching now, their rotors beating the air. The team gathered their gear and prepared to move to the landing zone. Sarah helped carry Martinez's body, refusing to leave him behind. No man left behind. That was the code. That was the promise. As they loaded into the helicopter and lifted off, Sarah took one last look at the battlefield below. The burning vehicles, the destroyed enemy positions, the rocks where they'd fought for their lives. She'd gone into that fight as a rookie, the new operator that everyone watched with doubt. She was leaving as something different, a warrior tested in combat. A SEAL who had proven her worth in the only way that truly mattered. But as the helicopter banked toward home, Sarah knew the fight wasn't over. Something had gone wrong with this mission. The intelligence had been off. The enemy response had been too quick, too organized. Someone had known they were coming. And Sarah had a terrible feeling that the truth behind Martinez's death was darker than anyone realized. The real mission was just beginning. The debriefing began 6 hours after the team returned to base. Sarah sat in a windowless conference room, still wearing her dusty combat uniform, the smell of gunpowder and blood still in her nostrils. Around the table sat Lieutenant Commander Garrett, Chief Webb, and the surviving team members. At the head of the table was Captain William Mercer, the SEAL Team 7 commanding officer, along with 2 intelligence officers Sarah had never seen before, Mercer's face was grim as he reviewed the mission reports. One operator killed in action. Another wounded seriously enough to require evacuation to a hospital in Germany. A compromised observation post. A high-value target that had escaped. By any objective measure, the mission had been a disaster. But something about the way the intelligence officers were looking at each other made Sarah's instincts scream. These weren't the reactions of people disappointed by a failed mission. These were the reactions of people who had expected it to fail. "Walk me through it again," Captain Mercer said, his voice tired. "From the moment you inserted to the moment you extracted. Every detail." Lieutenant Commander Garrett went through the timeline methodically. The insertion, the movement to the observation post, hours of surveillance, the vehicle that had left the compound with what they believed was the high-value target, the ambush of that vehicle, the discovery that the target wasn't inside, the massive enemy response that had nearly wiped out the team. One of the intelligence officers, a major whose name tag read Harrison, interrupted. "You said the vehicle was moving with purpose, like they knew where they were going." "Yes, sir," Garrett confirmed. "They weren't conducting a standard patrol. They were moving with a specific destination in mind." Harrison exchanged a look with the other intelligence officer. "In the enemy response to your contact with that vehicle, you estimated 20 to 30 fighters." At least, Chief Webb interjected. "Could have been more. They came at us in organized waves with good tactical discipline. These weren't insurgents. These were trained soldiers." Sarah watched the intelligence officers carefully. Something was wrong here. Their questions weren't about what had happened. They were confirmation questions, like they were checking their information against what the team reported. Like they already knew the answers. "Lieutenant Chen," Captain Mercer said, turning his attention to Sarah, "you were the one who first spotted the vehicle leaving the compound. Tell me exactly what you saw." Sarah sat up straighter, organizing her thoughts. "Sir, I observed 3 vehicles enter the compound at approximately 12:15 hours. Armed security emerged first, then allowed the passengers to exit. One of the passengers matched the physical description of our target. Approximately 30 minutes later, a single pickup truck departed the compound at high speed. I observed what I believed to be the same individual in the back of that truck." "But you couldn't be certain it was the same person?" Harrison asked, leaning forward. "No, sir, not with absolute certainty. The distance and conditions made positive identification impossible, but the timing and behavior suggested it was the target attempting to evade capture before the planned airstrike." Harrison made a note on his tablet, then looked up at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Lieutenant Chen, have you ever considered that you might have been meant to see that vehicle leave? That the entire thing might have been staged for your benefit?" The room went silent. Sarah felt her mind racing, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. "Sir, are you suggesting we were set up?" "I'm suggesting," Harrison said carefully, "that your team's position may have been compromised before you ever inserted. That the enemy knew you were coming and prepared accordingly." Chief Webb slammed his hand on the table. "Then why the hell did you send us in? If you suspected the mission was compromised, why risk our lives?" Captain Mercer raised a hand to calm Webb down. "Chief, stand down. Let them explain." The second intelligence officer, whose name tag identified him as Colonel Reed, spoke for the first time. His voice was cold and clinical. "For the past 6 months, we've suspected we have a leak somewhere in the intelligence chain. Someone with access to operational planning has been feeding information to enemy networks. We've lost 3 operations because the enemy seemed to know we were coming. Good operators have died because of this leak." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "So you used us as bait? You sent us on a mission you knew was compromised to try to identify your leak?" "Not exactly," Reed said. "We sent you on a legitimate mission with legitimate intelligence. But we also implemented certain safeguards. Your mission planning was compartmentalized. Only a very specific group of people knew the details of your operation. If the enemy knew you were coming, it would help us narrow down the list of potential leakers." Garrett stood up, his face red with fury. "You sacrificed Martinez to catch a spy? You let one of my men die as part of some intelligence operation you didn't bother to tell us about?" "Lieutenant Commander, sit down," Mercer ordered, his voice sharp. "I understand your anger. I share it. But there's more to this than you know." Reed pulled up a series of photos on the screen at the end of the conference room. Sarah recognized the compound they'd been surveilling. But these photos were from different angles and taken at different times than their observation period. "We've had assets watching that compound for weeks," Reed explained. "The high-value target you were looking for? He was never there. The whole setup was a trap designed to draw on American forces. But here's the interesting part. They didn't know exactly when you were coming or where you'd establish your observation post. They knew an operation was planned, but not the specifics." "How do you know that?" Sarah asked. Reed pulled up more photos, these ones showing the enemy fighters who had attacked the team. "Because we've been monitoring communications from the compound. After your team engaged the vehicle and revealed your position, there was chatter indicating surprise at your exact location. They knew Americans were in the area, but didn't know precisely where. If they'd known your op location beforehand, they would have ambushed you there instead of waiting for you to reveal yourselves." Sarah's tactical mind processed this information. So the leak gave them general information about the operation, but not the specific details. Which means the leak has access to high-level planning, but not to the actual operational orders. "Exactly," Harrison said, looking impressed. "And that narrows our suspect list considerably." Webb wasn't satisfied. "This is all very interesting, but it doesn't change the fact that we lost Martinez. It doesn't change the fact that we nearly lost the entire team." "When were you planning to tell us we were being used as bait?" "You weren't bait," Mercer said firmly. "You were operators conducting a legitimate mission. The intelligence aspects were compartmentalized for operational security reasons. That's not unusual, except people usually know when they're part of an intelligence operation," Garrett shot back. The room descended into argument. With the operators angry at having been used and the intelligence officers defending their methods, Sarah sat quietly, her mind working through everything she'd learned. Something still didn't add up. "The vehicle," Sarah said suddenly, her voice cutting through the argument. Everyone turned to look at her. "You said the target was never at the compound. But I saw someone who matched his description. If it wasn't him, who was it?" Harrison smiled slightly. "That's an excellent question, Lieutenant. And it's the question that's going to help us catch our leak." He pulled up another photo, this one showing the man Sarah had observed at the compound. "This is Kareem Hassan. He's a double agent who's been working with us for 2 years. He deliberately presented himself to make you think he was the target." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Because we fed information about this operation through 3 different channels, each with slightly different details. The version fed through one specific channel indicated the target would be at that compound on that specific date. When Hassan showed up playing the role of the target, and when the enemy prepared a trap at that location, it confirmed which channel was compromised." Sarah felt cold realization washing over her. "You knew it was a trap. You knew we'd be walking into a hostile situation, and you sent us anyway." Reed's expression hardened. "We sent a team of elite operators on a mission within their capabilities. We took calculated risks to protect future operations and future American lives. Yes, there was danger. There's always danger in what you do. But the intelligence we gained from this operation will save lives down the road. Tell that to Martinez's family," Webb said quietly, his voice heavy with grief and anger. The debriefing continued for another hour, but Sarah barely heard it. Her mind was stuck on one terrible truth. They'd been used. The mission had been real, but it had also been a test, a way to identify a leak by seeing how the enemy responded, and Martinez had died as a result. When the debriefing finally ended, Sarah walked out into the hot afternoon sun. She felt dirty, used, betrayed by her own command. She'd joined the SEALs to serve her country, to be part of something bigger than herself. She'd endured years of brutal training and constant doubt to prove she belonged here. And now she'd discovered that the people she trusted most, the ones giving the orders, were willing to sacrifice operators like chess pieces in larger games she wasn't privy to. Chief Webb found her sitting alone on a bench outside the team building. He sat down beside her without speaking for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. "You thinking about quitting?" he asked. Sarah considered the question honestly. "I don't know. Part of me wants to. This isn't what I signed up for. Webb nodded slowly. Yeah, I get that. I've felt that way a few times over the years. Usually after missions that went sideways, or when command made decisions I didn't agree with. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But here's what I've learned. The job isn't about the politics or the intelligence games or any of that bullshit. The job is about the people next to you. The teammates counting on you. Martinez didn't die for some intelligence operation. He died covering his team. He died doing his job. That matters more than all the rest of it. Sarah looked at Webb, surprised by the uncharacteristic philosophical moment from the usually gruff chief. You're saying I should let it go? Hell no, Webb said, with a slight smile. I'm saying you should be pissed as hell about it. But don't let it make you quit. The team needs good operators. We need people who actually give a damn, who'll fight for the person next to them. You proved you're that kind of operator yesterday. Don't let the brass take that away from you. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Captain Mercer requesting she come to his office immediately. Webb saw her expression change. What is it? Mercer wants to see me. Probably to make sure I'm not going to cause problems about being used as an intelligence asset without my knowledge. Webb stood up. Want me to come with you? Sarah appreciated the offer but shook her head. No, this is something I need to handle myself. She walked to the team headquarters building and climbed the stairs to Captain Mercer's office. His door was open, but she knocked anyway. Mercer looked up from his desk and gestured for her to enter and close the door. Lieutenant Chen, have a seat. Sarah sat down, her back straight, her expression neutral. Whatever was coming, she would face it head-on. Mercer studied her for a moment before speaking. I imagine you're pretty angry right now. You have every right to be. What happened during that debriefing wasn't handled well, and you deserve better than to learn about intelligence operations by having them sprung on you after the fact. Yes, sir, Sarah agreed. I'm angry. Martinez died on a mission that was partially designed to catch a spy. That's hard to accept. I understand. And I want you to know that I wasn't fully briefed on the intelligence aspects of the mission either. I knew we were looking for a leak, but I didn't know they were using your operation as part of that search. That's on me for not asking the right questions. Sarah felt some of her anger diffusing. At least Mercer was being honest with her. What happens now, sir? Mercer leaned back in his chair. Now we use the intelligence we gathered to find the leak and plug it. And I need to know if you're still committed to this team, or if this experience has burned you out. It was the question Sarah had been asking herself for hours. She thought about Martinez, about the way he'd stood up without hesitation to destroy that technical. She thought about Webb's words about the job being about the people next to you. She thought about all the years of training and sacrifice to get here. I'm still committed, sir, Sarah said firmly. But I want one thing in return. Mercer raised an eyebrow. What's that? I want to be part of finding this leak. Whoever sold us out got Martinez killed. I want to help make sure they answer for that. Slight smile crossed Mercer's face. I was hoping you'd say that. Because Reed and Harrison specifically requested you for the investigation. They were impressed by your tactical analysis during the debriefing. They think you might see things other investigators would miss. Sarah felt a surge of determination. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, 0600. You'll be briefed on everything we know about the leak and given access to all the operational files. This investigation takes priority over everything else. Mercer stood up, and Sarah did the same. One more thing, Lieutenant. What you did out there on that hillside? The way you fought, the way you adapted, the way you carried Martinez's body to the extract bird? That's what being a SEAL is about. Don't let politics or intelligence games make you forget that. Sarah left Mercer's office with a new sense of purpose. The grief over Martinez's death was still there, sharp and painful. But now, it had direction. Someone had betrayed them, and she was going to find out who. The mission wasn't over. It was just beginning, Sarah reported to the intelligence building at exactly 0600 the next morning. The building was separate from the main SEAL compound. It's a nondescript concrete structure that housed various classified operations. Major Harrison met her at the security checkpoint and escorted her through multiple locked doors to a secure briefing room deep in the building's interior. Inside, Colonel Reed was already present, along with 3 other people Sarah didn't recognize. Reed gestured to a chair at the conference table, and Sarah sat down, her notepad ready. "Lieutenant Chen, let me introduce you to the rest of the investigative team," Reed began. "This is Special Agent Kim Martinez from NCIS, no relation to your fallen teammate. Next to her is Captain James Wong from Army Counterintelligence. And at the end is Dr. Sarah Patel, our behavioral analyst. You 5 will be working together to identify and apprehend the leak." Sarah nodded to each person in turn. Agent Martinez was a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who looked like she'd seen her share of complex investigations. Captain Wong was older, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in intelligence work. Dr. Patel was younger than Sarah expected, probably not much older than Sarah herself, with an intensity that suggested a brilliant mind working constantly. Reed pulled up a series of files on the large screen. "Here's what we know. Over the past 8 months, we've had 5 operations compromised. In each case, the enemy seemed to have advance warning that allowed them to either evacuate or prepare ambushes. Your mission was the 6th. 3 operators have been killed as a result, and dozens of high-value targets have escaped capture." Agent Martinez took over the briefing. "We've been able to narrow down the leak to someone with access to a specific intelligence database called Nightfall. This database contains operational planning information for SEAL and Special Operations missions. Only 47 people have the required security clearances and database access to be our leak." 47 is still a lot of suspects, Sarah observed. "It is," Captain Wong agreed, "which is why we've been analyzing patterns. The leak doesn't have access to final operational orders, only to preliminary planning documents. They know generally what's being planned, but not the specific details, like insertion times or exact locations. That's why your team's OP location wasn't compromised, only the general mission area." Dr. Patel added her analysis. "We're looking for someone under financial pressure or with ideological motivations. Selling classified information requires either desperation or belief in a cause. We've been examining financial records, travel patterns, communications, and psychological profiles of all 47 suspects." Sarah listened carefully, her tactical mind processing the information. "Have you considered that the leak might not be motivated by money or ideology? What if it's personal? Revenge for something?" The investigators exchanged glances. Reed nodded slowly. "That's an angle we haven't fully explored." "What makes you think of that?" "Because selling out 5 missions over 8 months doesn't sound like someone doing it for money," Sarah explained. "If you're selling secrets for financial gain, you'd want to do it more frequently to maximize profit. And if it's ideological, you'd think they'd leak more information, try to do maximum damage. This pattern feels more selective, like someone is trying to hurt specific operations or specific people without drawing too much attention." Dr. Patel leaned forward, suddenly very interested. "That's an excellent insight. A revenge motivation would explain the pattern better than our current theories. Someone with a grudge against the special operations community or specific people within it." Agent Martinez pulled up a new file. "If we're looking at revenge as a motive, we should focus on people who have been passed over for promotions, disciplined, or who have had conflicts with SEAL Command. Let me run the suspect list through that filter." For the next hour, the team worked through the suspect list, identifying individuals who fit the revenge profile. They narrowed it down to 12 people who had documented conflicts with SEAL Team 7 specifically, or with Naval Special Warfare Command more broadly. Sarah studied the 12 profiles carefully. Most were civilians working in intelligence or logistics roles. A few were military personnel who had been denied SEAL training or had washed out partway through. One name stood out to her: Commander Richard Hastings, a Navy intelligence officer who had applied for SEAL training twice and been rejected both times due to medical issues. "Tell me about Hastings," Sarah said. Pointing to his file, Captain Wong pulled up Hastings' complete record. Age 42, Naval Academy graduate, decorated intelligence officer. Applied for SEAL training at age 23 and was rejected due to a shoulder injury. Applied again at age 25 after recovering and was rejected again, this time for psychological reasons. The psych evaluation noted issues with authority and anger management. But he stayed in the Navy and ended up in intelligence work, Sarah noted. That means he's still around the SEAL community, watching operators do the job he always wanted to do. That could breed resentment. Dr. Patel was nodding enthusiastically. Absolutely. Someone with that background could easily justify betraying SEAL operations as a form of revenge against the community that rejected him. He'd see it as evening the score. Reed looked skeptical. Hastings has been investigated before for various security concerns. Nothing was ever proven. He's careful, and he's smart. If he is our leak, catching him won't be easy. What's his current assignment? Sarah asked. Agent Martinez checked the records. He's assigned to the Joint Operations Planning Cell. He has access to Nightfall and would see preliminary operational planning for most SEAL missions. Sarah felt her instincts screaming. This was their leak. Everything fit. The access, the motive, the psychological profile. But Reed was right. Proving it would be the challenge. We need to set a trap, Sarah said suddenly. Just like they used my mission to narrow down the suspects. We need to create a fake operation that only Hastings has access to. If the enemy responds to that operation, we'll know for certain it's him. Reed shook his head. I'm not risking more operators on another bait mission. We got lucky last time that your team survived. Then we don't use real operators, Sarah countered. We use a completely fabricated mission. Create false intelligence about a high-value target at a specific location. Give Hastings access to that intelligence, but no one else. Then we monitor that location to see if enemy forces show up expecting an American operation. Captain Wong was nodding. That could work. We'd need to make it convincing enough that Hastings would believe it's real. And we'd need to monitor him closely to see if he contacts his handlers. Over the next 6 hours, the investigative team crafted an elaborate false operation. They created fake intelligence reports about a supposed high-value target hiding in a compound near the Pakistani border. They drafted preliminary operational plans for a SEAL team to conduct a capture mission. They made it all look legitimate, with proper security classifications and realistic operational details. The final step was the most delicate. They needed to ensure only Commander Hastings had access to this false intelligence. Agent Martinez worked with database administrators to create a unique access log that would track exactly who viewed the fabricated files. The trap is set, Martinez announced 3 days later. The false operation file was uploaded to Nightfall this morning. According to access logs, Commander Hastings viewed it at 10:30 hours. Now came the waiting. They had surveillance teams monitoring Hastings' communications and movements. They had assets watching the fake compound location to see if enemy forces arrived. Sarah spent those days reviewing everything they knew, looking for any detail they might have missed. 72 hours after Hastings accessed the fake operation file, the surveillance team monitoring the compound location reported activity. Enemy fighters were setting up positions around the area, clearly preparing for an American operation that would never come. We've got him, Reed said with grim satisfaction. Hastings is definitely our leak. But catching Hastings in the act proved more difficult than anticipated. He was careful, using encrypted communications and dead drops to pass information to his handlers. The investigative team needed absolute proof before they could move to arrest him. That meant catching him in direct contact with enemy operatives. Sarah proposed a risky plan. They would approach Hastings directly, confront him with what they knew, and try to force him into making a mistake. It was dangerous because it would alert him that he was under investigation. But Sarah believed his ego and anger would make him careless. Reed initially rejected the idea, but Dr. Patel supported Sarah's assessment. Lieutenant Chen is right about his psychology. Hastings has been getting away with this for months. He thinks he's smarter than everyone. If we confront him, he'll want to prove he can still outsmart us. That arrogance will be his downfall. The confrontation was scheduled for a Monday morning. Sarah Reed and Agent Martinez entered Hastings' office unannounced. The commander looked up from his desk, surprise flashing across his face before he composed himself. "Colonel Reed, what can I do for you?" Hastings asked, his voice carefully neutral. Reed closed the door and locked it. Commander, we need to discuss your access to the Nightfall database and several compromised operations over the past 8 months. Hastings' expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his hands tighten slightly on the edge of his desk. I'm not sure what you're referring to, sir. I access Nightfall regularly as part of my duties, including a file about an operation near the Pakistani border, Sarah asked, stepping forward. An operation that doesn't actually exist, but that enemy fighters are currently preparing to defend against? For just a second, genuine surprise crossed Hastings' face. Then he recovered, but it was too late. Sarah had seen the tell, the momentary crack in his composure. I review many operational files, Hastings said stiffly. I can't be expected to remember every specific one. Agent Martinez placed a folder on his desk. These are communications intercepts from known enemy operatives. They reference specific details from that fake operation, details that only someone who viewed that file would know. You're the only person who accessed it. Hastings' face hardened. This is entrapment. You can't prove anything. You don't need to prove you passed the specific information, Reed said. We just need to prove you had access, motive, and opportunity. We've got all three. Plus surveillance footage of you making dead drops and using encrypted communications with known hostile operatives. Sarah watched Hastings' body language shift. The careful composure was cracking, replaced by the anger Dr. Patel had predicted. You people rejected me, Hastings said, his voice venomous. Twice I tried to become a SEAL. Twice you told me I wasn't good enough. Meanwhile, you're letting women into the teams now? He glared at Sarah with undisguised hatred. You let her become a SEAL, but I wasn't acceptable. That's a joke. There it was. The confirmation they needed, spoken in anger. Sarah felt a cold satisfaction. Martinez's death hadn't been meaningless. This investigation was going to result in justice. Commander Richard Hastings. Agent Martinez said formally, you are under arrest for espionage, treason, in providing material support to enemy forces resulting in the deaths of American service members. Hastings lunged for his desk drawer, but Sarah was faster. She moved with the speed and precision of her SEAL training, crossing the distance in 2 steps and slamming Hastings against the wall before he could reach whatever weapon or evidence he was going for. She secured his hands behind his back while Martinez called for security. As guards led Hastings away in handcuffs, still shouting about injustice and discrimination, Sarah felt the weight of the past weeks finally beginning to lift. They'd found the leak. They'd stopped him from compromising more operations. Martinez's death and the sacrifice of her team hadn't been for nothing. But the moment of satisfaction was brief. As Sarah walked out of the building into the evening sun, she found Chief Webb waiting for her. His expression was serious. They told me you caught the bastard, Webb said. Good work. Thanks, Chief. It was a team effort. Webb nodded, then handed Sarah a folder. This came through this afternoon. New mission briefing. Team deploys in 72 hours. Sarah took the folder, feeling the familiar mix of anxiety and anticipation. This was the job. One mission ended, and another began. The cycle never stopped. What's the target? She asked. High-value target in Yemen. Real one this time, not another intelligence operation. Webb's expression softened slightly. Captain Mercer wants you on the team. Said after everything you've been through, you've earned your spot. No more questions about whether you belong. Sarah felt emotion tightening her throat. After all the doubt, all the scrutiny, all the battles fought both in combat and in conference rooms, she'd finally been fully accepted. She'd proven herself in the only way that mattered to SEALs, through blood, sacrifice, and absolute commitment to the mission and her teammates. I'll be ready, Sarah said firmly. Webb smiled, a rare expression on his usually stern face. I know you will. You've got what it takes, Chen. Martinez saw it. I see it now. You're one of us. 3 days later, Sarah sat in another helicopter, flying toward another mission. This time, she felt different. The rookie uncertainty was gone, replaced by the confidence of an operator who had been tested and had not been found wanting. She'd faced down enemy fire, uncovered a traitor, and proven that her place in the teams was earned, not given. As the helicopter descended toward the landing zone, Sarah checked her weapons one final time. The enemy below had no idea what was coming. They thought they were safe in their compound, protected by darkness and distance. They were wrong. They were about to learn what every enemy of America eventually learned when you heard the words Navy SEAL. It was already too late. And whether that SEAL was male or female didn't matter. What mattered was the training, the determination, and the absolute refusal to fail. Sarah had all three in abundance. The enemy had made their biggest mistake when they killed David Martinez. They'd made Sarah Chen angry, and an angry SEAL was the most dangerous weapon in the American arsenal. As the helicopter touched down and the team rushed out into the night, Sarah's last thought was simple and fierce. Martinez, this one's for you. The enemy thought it was over when one rookie had faced them with zero backup and still walked away victorious. They thought they'd seen the worst that could happen. But by midnight, they were going to learn something important. The rookie wasn't a rookie anymore. She was a warrior. And warriors didn't stop fighting until every last enemy regretted the day they'd ever challenged American resolve. The mission began. And this time, there would be no escape for those who had shed American blood. Sarah Chen and her team would make absolutely certain of that.